And welcome back, everybody. So we are going to cover the Anthony Kirkland case. That's the one we've been talking about constantly here today, the Ohio case, this convicted serial killer who's getting a second shot at a sentencing hearing. This new jury, who never heard any of the details of this case before last week, now will have to determine whether or not this man should be sentenced to death or life in prison. And so much happened today, including the defendant himself providing a statement to the jury. We played that for you in our last break, and we are going to talk about this because on Monday we are going to hear the closing arguments by both the state and the defense, so we'll try to predict what they say. But as you know, here on Law and Crime, we cover a lot. We don't just cover the Anthony Kirkland case or live trials. There is so much happening in the news that we have a special report from our very own Anthony Velez talking a little bit more about it. Take a look.
Here are today's top crime stories trending on Law&Crime.com and across the country. Prosecutors in Los Angeles are investigating allegations of sexual assault against Nick Carter of boy band Backstreet Boys. The accusations against Carter pertain to an incident in 2003 where former pop singer Melissa Schumann of the girl band Dream claims Carter sexually assaulted her. A police report was filed in February against Carter, but investigators have not identified the victim. Carter has denied any wrongdoing. A mother in Texas was caught on camera pulling a gun on a teen trying to jump into her daughter's fight with another girl. The mother, Chade Laquette, can be seen brandishing the weapon as another girl tries to intervene in the fight. Laquette claims the gun was a toy BB gun and only pulled out the weapon because the other teens off camera had knives. Authorities are investigating the incident. The man accused of killing a young nurse and suspected of up to 6 other murders was out on bail before the killing due to a mistake by his lawyer. 27-year-old Danielle Drayton of Connecticut was arrested in California in connection with the rape and murder of 23-year-old Samantha Stewart, whose body was found inside her apartment last month. Authorities claim Drayton met his victims on the online dating app Tinder. Drayton reportedly confessed to 6 other murders in New York, Connecticut, and California. Drayton was released on bail after his lawyer mistakenly told the judge Drayton had no prior criminal history. Drayton was charged with attempted murder, forcible rape, false imprisonment, and other charges. Those were today's top crime stories. I'm Anthony Velez for Law and Crime.
Great reporting as always, Anthony. Go to lawandcrime.com to learn a little bit more of the top trending stories of the day. But we have to talk about this Tinder date because it's actually we've been focusing on it for the last part of the week, and now this crazy development that this guy might have not been out on the loose. Let's talk a little bit more about it, and I'm so happy. I have a very special guest with me right now. Criminal defense attorney Rahul Manchanda is joining us. Rahul, great to see you and welcome here to Law and Crime.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so if I'm getting this right, there was the potential that he might not have been out on the loose if the attorney properly told the judge about this guy's criminal history. Am I understanding that correctly?
Yeah, well, a lot of things happen in the course of an arraignment or a situation like this. Some things are known and some things are unknown, but the reality is it may have had something to do with it. Absolutely, absolutely.
So let's say he did tell the judge about this guy's prior criminal history, and we heard from other people when we listened to this case who said this guy was in and out of trouble. Would the judge have done something differently?
It's always a but-for argument. You never really can know for sure. But the reality is it would have been a factor. Obviously, it would have been a factor whether to keep him, detained or not, to offer him bail, to ROR. But it's definitely one of the factors involved. But there's no guarantee. Obviously, every judge has the ultimate say in terms of what happens when the person is presented with the charges under the arraignment.
But the attorney did something wrong here. I mean, really something wrong. What are the ramifications for this attorney?
Well, did the attorney know about it? Do we know if the attorney knew? Did he purposely mislead? Did he withhold the information? These are all questions that have to be asked. I mean, will a disciplinary committee investigate the intent or the knowledge forth? That's very important. I think it really depends on what the attorney knew. Obviously, the attorney would say, no, I didn't know about it. This is something that wasn't apparent to me. If he had any brains or if he knew what was going on. But the reality is we just don't know what the attorney was thinking. We don't know what he knew. At least I don't know what he knew at this point. So.
Well, okay, so this guy was allegedly out on bail when he allegedly murdered a young nurse, raped another woman, and attempted to kill another person, almost was, kidnapping her. Who knows what he was going to do. He claims that he was involved in, I think, 6 other murders. If that's the case, and we're talking about the Anthony Kirkland case too, a guy who got out in 2003, killed 4 women, how does this happen? How is someone not apprehended after the first offense? How do they keep going on this pattern?
Look, we have a common law system in this country. It's not the civil code. You know, in this country, it's all about, you know, the prosecution and the defense and the judge. I mean, that's what happens between those three parties is essentially what happens with those three parties. Hindsight is always 20/20. Probably in every criminal case or civil case, you know, we can always look back on and say, well, this was said, this was not said. The question here is whether or not the attorney knew or not.
Okay,
you know, that's also the prosecutor has
so,
the prosecutor also had an obligation to do his homework, and the prosecutor clearly would have access to information that defense counsel at the arraignment wouldn't have known.
Take away the attorney though. This guy committing multiple crimes, how is he not caught after the first instance if he's really says he's been involved in so much and you know, going on a spree? Is it someone cleaning up the evidence, no one around? I always assumed someone commits one crime, they're going to be apprehended or they're going to be tracked down days later. I don't understand how someone could go on a spree like this.
Well, there's a lot of factors involved here. There's over-incarceration, there's filling of the jails. There's 70 million Americans right now with a criminal record. That's greater than the population of France. That's 1 out of 3 adults in this country. I mean, that's Harvey Silverglate, famous criminal defense attorney, said the average American commits 3 felonies a day from the time they wake up to the time they go to bed at night, not even knowing it. So we live in a grid. We live in a mass incarceration, some would say even a police state. You know, the reality is if you were to pick up everybody that may or may not have transgressed the situation, you'd have the entire country in jail. We have literally 70 to 80 million Americans with a criminal record. That's 1 out of 3 adults. That's insane to me, and I think that we need to look at that. The criminal justice system also is being reformed. Donald Trump is even pushing something like that. People were hoping that the Obama administration would push these issues, but apparently, you know, if you've got a subpopulation of greater than the population of France within your nation that has a criminal record of adults, what kind of country are we? So I think everyone's cognizant of that. Even Mayor de Blasio in New York City is introducing legislation. They just decriminalized marijuana. We're just arresting too many people. There's something wrong with the society if we're balkanized to this level, that everybody literally is a suspect of something. You've got to ask yourself a question. So I think within the courtroom, especially in the criminal courts, you know, in this situation, I really wouldn't place a lot of blame on the defense counsel. I might say, look, what about the prosecutor? You know, I mean, he has the one who has access to this information.
Well, we should know that the Nassau County District Attorney's Office, as well as the Nassau Police Department, did not respond yet to what happened, but that might change. Someone has some explaining to do. I think that's the lesson. And this guy, this is only the start of his troubles, and we'll cover it here probably a little bit more on Law and Crime as soon as we know more. It's a really horrific story. But we're going to switch gears. We're going to switch gears. And if you want to look more at that story, the top trending stories, again, go to lawandcrime.com. But let's switch and go to the Anthony Kirkland case. And what I want to talk about right now is I want to take a step back, because on Monday, we are going to hear the closing arguments from the state and the defense. So let's start from the beginning and play you the prosecution's opening statement from the beginning of this case, and they can explain to you how they outlined and what is going to happen. It's a great place to start if you're just joining us, or if you've been following this case, it's a great recap. Let's start right there. So we know that Anthony Kirkland killed multiple people. Cassandra Crawford, who you were just hearing about, was one of his youngest victims, 14 years old. And when we come back from our break, we're going to play you the testimony of Patricia Crawford, the grandmother of Cassandra, talking about when she disappeared. But I want to bring back in Rahul to ask him one quick question. As we watch the opening statement, we're seeing Joe Dieters. That's the prosecutor who made the inappropriate comment in the first case, which is why we have a resentencing. Do you think that was justified to have a resentencing hearing here?
To be very blunt with you, no, I don't.
Why?
I don't think it was reversible error. I think it was a situation wherein the statement didn't go to the merits. This case is absolutely horrific. The amount of criminal activity here, the amount of premeditation, the length of time that it went on, the age of the parties, of the victims. I mean, you know, this is really grasping at straws here. To be very blunt with you, I've been doing this for almost 20 years, and I really don't think that was any reason to do a resentencing in this situation. It's reopening the entire can of worms. It was difficult enough to convict somebody beyond a reasonable doubt.
Right.
But, I mean, come on. I mean, there's a limit here, right?
Well, we'll have to see. And again, now we're towards the conclusion of this second resentencing hearing. What will happen? Same thing as the last case? We'll have to see. Stay tuned. That is Patricia Crawford, the grandmother of 14-year-old Cassandra Crawford, who was brutally killed by Anthony Kirkland. I want to talk a little bit more about what it's like to be speaking with family members who lost loved ones in that kind of way. So let me bring back on my very special guest, criminal defense attorney Rahul Manchanda. Rahul, I'm sure in your practice you have been a part of that a lot. What is it like speaking with family members who first didn't know what happened to their loved ones, and then they find out the worst case scenario? What's that like?
I mean, it's horrific. It's absolutely horrific. You know, you literally see the sea change in their countenance. They literally transform into a different person. It's almost like, you know, there's the 4 steps of shock. You know, there's disbelief, there's anger, there's sadness, but you know, you almost see it play out right in front of you. It's literally a molecular change that happens with these family members. It's just, they can't even, and you see it, and you know what's going to happen. What I tend to do is try to put them onto a therapist or a counselor right away. Because as attorneys, we are really not equipped for these kinds of issues.
Right.
And I think that we deal with thousands of cases. Sometimes it's very easy for us to become almost clinical in terms of the data, and you sometimes lose the compassion. So it's very important, I think, if you're practicing this area, to immediately assign them a therapist, not only for their benefit, but also for liability issues. You don't know what's going to happen at that point. So it's very important to have like a wingman, a therapist right away on a red phone, if you will.
Right. Sounds. I can't imagine. I can't imagine. And we're trying to see it. We're seeing it from this perspective. But now I want to play you something else. This is the testimony of Howard Grant from the Cincinnati Police Department. He was the officer who found the body of Cassandra Crawford. Let's play that for you right now. Just another moment of Anthony Kirkland admitting to what he did to these victims, including burning Cassandra Crawford, disposing of her. I want to bring back in Rahul to talk about this. Now, Rahul, here's my question to you. He said with the burning that this was an instance of, hey, you know what, I wasn't trying to get rid of evidence. This is more of a spiritual burning. This is what the Vikings used to do. Why would he say that? Does he really believe that, or is he just trying to say, hey, look, I wasn't trying to get rid of evidence?
I mean, I think it's almost laughable. The Vikings, I mean, how does he relate to the Vikings? And why did he burn the private part areas, mainly? I mean, that's where the crime really took place. I mean, that looks to me like not so much a ritualistic, grave situation or burial situation. It looks to me like he's trying to destroy the evidence, DNA situation.
Why did he even give this interview? Why did he make himself available for the police? Why didn't he lawyer up? Why did he confess to everything? Because if you're looking at the defense who wants to say this guy might suffer from a mental disease or defect, I'm starting to think it a little bit more.
Well, you got to wonder about the counsel here, his defense counsel. I mean, I don't know if it was state appointed or private, but sometimes you've got to make a decision. Is your client going to look, more, kind or better, or is he not? I mean, the reality is that's a decision a defense counselor has to make, and I think in this situation it probably wasn't a great idea. I
mean, okay, yeah. So he voluntarily gave information to police. Good for him. He was cooperative. He still admitted to these crimes, and we talked about it in the break. Is he trying to humanize himself? Today he provided a statement to the jury where he said, "You don't have to find. I'm not asking for mercy. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm asking you to spare my life. But if you kill me, I'll understand." What is he trying to aim for? What's his goal?
I think in this situation, gathering from his testimony and from what I'm seeing from this, I don't know if he cares at this point, to be very blunt with you. I don't even think he cares about his own life. I don't think he cares about living or dying. I think that he's literally doing this on the advice of counsel. Because from what I'm reading, he's so nonplussed by his own testimony. And I've been doing this for a decade or two, and I can see this. But I don't even think that he truly cares. He may even think it's a relief to be in this situation, but I think this is completely acting on advice of counsel, and that's why he's doing such a terrible job, in my opinion, of it. It's not really, I mean, there's no forensic experts here in terms of backing him up, so I can't really say this is something that he's doing voluntarily. I think he's just doing it like a Hail Mary on the advice of counsel.
Listen, I mean, he got a second chance at the sentencing hearing here. He's got one more opportunity to save his life. And we're going to talk more about that when we come back. There's a lot to talk about in the Anthony Kirkland case, so stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everybody. Here on Law and Crime, we are focusing on, and I think, oh, there we go, I'm back. Here on Law and Crime, we're focusing on one of the most interesting, biggest cases in the country right now, and that's the Anthony Kirkland case. And we'll jump back to that in a second. But we would be remiss here on Law and Crime if we didn't talk about probably the most high-profile case in the country, and that is the Paul Manafort case. And I want to talk about that right now. President Trump's former campaign manager, who is facing his first of 2 trials. This one's in Virginia, facing charges related to bank fraud, tax fraud. A lot of at stake here, a lot of implications. Got to tell you, if this was any other person, probably wouldn't be an interesting case to follow. You got accountants testifying, not that interesting, numbers. But this one, very interesting to talk about. And I want to bring on back criminal defense attorney Rahul Manchanda to talk about it. So my first question to you with this is, the idea that we were waiting to see what his strategy would be. He said he was pleading not guilty. Would he say he had nothing to do with these bank fraud, tax fraud charges? His strategy seems to be, let's blame Rick Gates, who you could say is his co-conspirator, his co-cooperator. Does that strategy usually work in cases blaming someone else?
Well, you know, it's interesting. In the day and age of RICO and conspiracy, no, not really. Because if you're a part of the wheel and spoke theory, you know, you're still part of it. I mean, the reality is, then it becomes an analysis of how much did you know and when did you know it. You know, it's just a delay in terms of culpability. So I don't think that the blame game works here. I think to some extent it staves off the inevitable. Of what
inevitable
happens.
Meaning he's
well,
going to be found
in a
guilty?
sense, well, no, I don't want to say that too. This kind of brings me back to what I was talking about earlier about Harvey Silverglate, the 3 felonies per day, unknowingly. I mean, listen, we're on a grid. If they want to get you, they'll get you for something, and that's what's really scary about this case. Because if you think about it, you know, an international lobbyist like Paul Manafort or even Roger Stone, people like that, you know, they were doing things, you know, helping and cross-pollinating from different nations, and they were actually involved in other nations as well. So it's a business like anything else, almost like the Jack Abramoff situation. You're going to find something that may or may not, even the prosecutors, the U.S. attorneys have no idea what's going on sometimes. So this is just a complete hotbed of morass and a mess. I really believe that.
From a legal standpoint, if you have a high-profile individual who has a lot of people working for him, is there ever a defense to say, listen, I didn't know what was going on, the people that prepared my, you know, my taxes, my business manager, is that ever a defense that I was kept out of the loop, or is that not knowing about it is really not a defense?
Well, see, that's the thing. That's why, you know, the RICO laws in the 60s and Robert F. Kennedy were really, really scary to a lot of people. Not just organized criminal elements, but we're talking about legitimate businesses, you know, like CEOs of corporations, massive corporations, because for the first time in history, they couldn't say I wasn't there. They couldn't say I didn't know about it. They couldn't say I was in a different room. They couldn't say it was a little conspiracy within my company or my entity, because now they're responsible for it. As long as there's a predicate criminal act, and if you're the head honcho, or if you're sitting on that board, guess what? Under RICO, you can be indicted, and it's no joke.
Real quick,
it's really un-American to some extent if you think about it, because it's almost like, you know, it's almost unconstitutional. But it was almost required at that time period to take on what they were, you know, considering a very, very big national security threat of organized crime across the country.
Little different scenario here, and I think we have about 20 seconds, so I'm just going to get a yes or no from you.
Sure.
You think if he's found guilty, we might see a pardon?
Who knows what, you know, lurks in the hearts of men. I believe that, you know, a lot of people feel that a lot of the people that were surrounding Donald Trump were unfairly targeted and were hit harder than others. And I think Donald Trump knows that. And I think that a lot of people know that. It's not just him. I think it's maybe the vast majority of the country feels that way. The proverbial deep state, if you will. You know, he's got a lot of supporters who believe that he's being unfairly targeted by a lot of different elements. So I don't think he would, you know, if he were to issue a pardon, I don't think he would get a lot of pushback.
No, well, he would have if he pardoned him before the trial started. If he pardons him after he's found guilty, it might have been a different scenario. Sure. And we're going to follow it here on Law and Crime because there's a lot of legal angles and a lot of legal strategy. And for the first time, everybody's a lawyer, everybody's a legal expert, everybody thinks they know. But I'll tell you, it's very interesting to watch because there's so many different scenarios of what could happen. We'll cover it here on Law and Crime. Now, let's switch gears. Let's go back to Anthony Kirkland, the Ohio case. We talked about Cassandra Crawford, but she was not the youngest victim of Anthony Kirkland. No, he killed Esme Kenny. You see her right there, 13 years old. In order to understand what happened to this young girl, I think it would be apropos to play the testimony of her mother, Lisa Kenny, who provided a deposition testimony that was played for the jurors. Take a look. Okay, we're focusing on Esme Kenny now, the last and the youngest victim of Anthony Kirkland, 13 years old. I want to bring back in Rahul to ask him the million-dollar question right now. At the end of the day, is the jury going to find for the death penalty? Do the aggravating factors outweigh any mitigating factors put forward by the defense?
To be very blunt with you, I just don't see any way out of this for this guy. I really don't. I mean, I've been doing this for quite a while. And you know, his own testimony, I mean, it was damning. I think that they brought the relatives involved, and it's just horrific. You know, I just don't see it happening. I just don't see it happening. There's no merit here. There's no rehabilitation of the defendant, which is what they were trying to do.
Okay, what about the idea that he had a traumatic childhood? and that perhaps he suffered physical abuse, sexual abuse, and maybe he does suffer from a traumatic brain injury if they believe the defense's witnesses.
That would be, that would be useful if this was an A to B scenario. But, he brought in the Viking story, about the proper burial. Then you've got the attenuation of that. Then you've got, the burning. But the burning only happened in the private areas where the crime took place. It wasn't even like the regular. I mean, it's incredible. I mean, it's just so premeditated and so planned out and so horrific and over such a long, sprawling period of time, with so many victims in that situation, that scenario. That I just, how can that be attributed to that? I don't see it. I think this is one of those areas where, the rehabilitation factor would be very, very difficult to do.
And he didn't do himself any favors today by saying, I admit to everything. You don't have to show me mercy.
Again, and as I said earlier, I really believe that, this was on advice of counsel.
And I agree with you because he looked over at his attorneys at one point.
I don't think that he truly cares about, whether he lives or dies, to be very blunt with you. I think that this is a person who's been gone for a long time. I think on the advice of counsel, it's a Hail Mary in a situation like this, almost a Hail Mary. Like, just do this for us and just say this for us. And I really don't think it's going to turn out well.
Well, I will have to see. And Monday is going to be the closing arguments from both sides, so you're not going to want to miss it. Maybe we'll have Rahul back on to talk a little bit more about it. So we're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. That was pretty incredible, I must tell you. And Rahul, I'm here with Rahul. Rahul, when you see this, police they've been in and out of the media. Some people, a lot of bad press. I always like seeing these kinds of stories when we can highlight the heroism of officers like that. What did you make of that? Absolutely.
It's a very heartwarming story. And, we hundreds of thousands of stories happen like this every day. Police officers from every state put their lives on the line. It's a heroic lifestyle. They don't get the thanks and the kudos, the attention that they deserve. And we only hear seemingly negative things that happen. And it really, there's been a real sort of change now. Look at some of the things they're doing. This story is absolutely poignant, and it's very typical of the daily life of a police officer. Every single day they do things like this.
Well, hopefully
it's wonderful to see it.
Not that typical where they have to push people off of train platforms, but right. Congratulations, and really, that officer deserves all of our praise, and really, it was terrific that we had the opportunity to interview him. So, I want to switch gears because we talk about great officers. Let's talk about Sergeant Jennifer Mitch from the Cincinnati Police Department. This sergeant was involved intimately in the Esme Kenny disappearance. Remember, 13-year-old girl brutally killed by Anthony Kirkland. She testified in this case, in which I'm going to play you her testimony right now. This is when she explains not only investigating what happened to Esme, but also finding the defendant. Take a look. Okay, I need to try to understand what's going on with Anthony Kirkland. I want to ask you a question, Rahul. At one end, he's so easy to cooperate with police. At the other end, he's lying about when he's found by investigators who he is, what his real name is. What's going on in the mind of Anthony Kirkland? How do we explain this behavior?
Well, again, that goes right against the whole argument of rehabilitation. I mean, he's just being absolutely disingenuous. And there's a lot of thought going into this. If you notice, there's a lot of thought going into this deception. It's elaborate. It's ornate. So, all attempts at rehabilitation in this situation are really kind of going by the wayside in this situation. I mean, how do you justify somebody that's being caught with their proverbial pants down?
Or knives in their pocket.
Knives in their pocket, exactly, to make it more of, the analogy. So I really think this is not going the way that defense counsel wants. I think that everything that could go wrong is going wrong. Murphy's Law really does apply in this scenario.
Well, you actually lead me perfectly where we're going to go after the break, to the defendant's police interview. And everything that could go wrong did. We'll be right back. Anthony Kirkland admitting to his crimes. The question becomes why. Want to bring back in Rahul Manchanda to ask about this. The techniques that the officers use to get him to admit to all of these crimes. What do you think about that in your experience, the strategy there?
It's definitely modern day policing. I think they use a lot of technology, a lot of psychology. They use a lot of different tactics as well to elicit the information. It used to be, back in the day, simple good cop, bad cop. No, it's much more involved now. They have classes on all sorts of behavioral issues, things of that nature. So I think they're pulling a lot of things from a lot of different areas, scientific and not so scientific, but I think it's definitely almost community-oriented policing in a sense.
Well, I got to tell you, it was pretty interesting in this case because I think he was interviewed maybe 3 times, and he kept giving information, more information, and more information to each one of the detectives until he basically confessed to all of his crimes. So, there's a lot more to talk about. We'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we have a lot more to cover here on Anthony Kirkland. You are listening to Anthony Kirkland confessing to killing Kimya Rollinson, a 25-year-old young woman. Now, I'm back here with Rahul. In your experience, okay, you're a prominent criminal defense attorney. I'm sure you hear defendants, their own words where they admit to these kind of crimes, but I have to ask you, does it ever get old? Does everything always, when you listen to this, what are you thinking? He's saying it in such a nonchalant kind of way.
I mean, it's bone-chilling. You never get used to it. You know, 2 decades in, you never get used to it. You know, the depths of the human depravity, you really never get used to it. I think that we all, if we're in this field for a long period of time, there's a certain level of PTSD, I think, you know, in terms of, you know, what you hear. You really never can become completely desensitized to it, but, you know, the depths are bone-chilling. That's really the only word that I have for it.
It really is, and you're listening to him talk and confess. It's almost, do you get the feeling, he was interviewed by multiple detectives and gave more detail and more detail and more detail. Is it almost a sense of, and I can't speak for him, a sense of pride, a sense of let me explain what happened, or is it almost like I've been holding all of this in, I want to let it out, I want to tell somebody what I did, because they appealed to his sense as a father, they appealed to a religious sense, they really got him to get this information out. What do you think it was for him to confess to his crimes?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of all the above. I don't think it's one or another. I think that you know, the police officers are very skilled in what they do, but you know, again, you know, there is something to be said about, you know, community-oriented policing and incorporating technology and behavioral sciences, you know, into the policing. It isn't just, you know, Keystone Cops anymore, a guy running around with a dually stick. You know,
yeah.
A lot has changed. There's a lot of integration, Homeland Security and the FBI and NYPD or the police departments work together. They share technology. The State Department, you know, Central Intelligence. You know, everyone's sharing information. Department of Defense. It's a different policing world now, and so they draw on many different aspects of policing. And it isn't, you know, NYPD Blue with Sipowicz anymore, you know, right. That kind of thing. It's a different story now.
You know, here on Law&Crime, we present the reality, and many times it's very ugly, including when we play you the testimony of family members of the victim. So you just heard what happened to this young girl from the defendant himself, her killer. Now I want to play you the deposition testimony of Gary Rollinson. This is the father of Kimya. Let's learn a little bit about what happened to this girl from her father. Welcome back, everybody. We are talking about all of the different victims of Anthony Kirkland. Each one is different, each one has a different story, and each one seems to have been attacked by this man for different reasons. I want to bring back in Rahul Manchanda to talk more about it. So, do we have a sense, or do you have a sense about what fueled him to attack and kill these 4 women after he was released from prison? Esme Kenny, the last one, the youngest one, she was jogging and bumped into him, and he said his anger took over. What do you sense here? They're all women, they're different ages, but what do you get here?
Yeah, I mean, that was the first thing. They're not women, they're girls. I mean, the jogger was 13, I believe. You know, this is clearly a sick, misguided individual. Something is definitely wrong. So I don't really understand how he could be rehabilitated. You know, in terms of what the closing arguments are going to be. I mean, I really think that they really need to try to rehabilitate him. I mean, his testimony was damning, the witnesses were damning, but they've got to try to, you know, pull it together somehow. But, you know, this isn't even a situation where it was women, it was girls. I mean, the guy, you know, so this is a reprehensible scenario and situation. There's really no coming back from this, in my opinion.
We are going to talk more about what the closing argument should entail for the prosecution and the defense, because we know the prosecution had some trouble last time around. That's why we have this second case. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. Okay, everybody, go to lawandcrime.com if you want to learn a little bit more of the top trending stories of the day. But criminal defense attorney Rahul Manchanda and I are going to talk a little bit more about that horrific guy who's found on Tinder. First question to you is, do you keep seeing these kinds of cases where social media dating apps are creating a recipe for disaster, a recipe for crime?
Well, it's a problem, and I mean, for example, these WhatsApp chats. I mean, they tend to be encrypted, and they've led to mob violence. You know, with false allegations, people literally in India, what is it, 30 or 40 people have been murdered. You know, our government put some of these chat administrators in prison because of the stuff, and they could do that over there. The question is, can we do that over here? I mean, it's the wild, wild west, the internet right now. The Council on Foreign Relations, Richard Haas, just came out with a story about how the internet is just literally lawless and
because you don't know who's on the other end.
You have no idea what's happening, and rumor mongering tends to take on a life form of its own, and then there's really no rhyme or reason. And a lot of these chats are they really. These apps, they're not regulated. Nobody knows what the hell is going on. It's very difficult to know what's happening.
This is the worst case scenario. When everybody's scared about dating online, this is because of what might happen. Now, when you read about this, I believe that it was the prosecutor who didn't alert the court to this guy's prior criminal record. If that's the case, not even his defense attorney, a prosecutor who didn't tell it to the judge, what do you make of that?
Well, the arraignment process is a very, very fast, quick one. As the reality is, sometimes they don't have all the information with them at the time. It's literally just about getting people to see a judge and entering a plea, guilty or not guilty, or whatever the case may be, and asking for bail. The prosecutor has a lot of discretion to release people if they want to, or detain them. So it's not always an exact science, and it's a lot of people sometimes involved, and sometimes people slip through the cracks. It happens. Is it acceptable? Not really, but it's a human system run by humans. It's not
pretty scary, because he had 3 prior arrests in California involving assaults against women. The same issue here. But again, it's a pretty fascinating case. But here's what we do. We recommend you go to lawandcrime.com to learn a little bit more about it. And here's what we're going to do now. We're going to switch gears ourselves, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the Anthony Kirkland case. So as we end out our day, we thought it would be most appropriate to end with the words from the defendant. Anthony Kirkland provided an unsworn statement today in court to the jury. And what did he ask? Did he ask for forgiveness? Did he ask for his life to be spared? Did he say he's sorry? Let's play that for you right now. Did you see the little look that Anthony Kirkland gave his attorney? I want to talk about that right now with Rahul. We talked about it throughout the program. You said, or you were making it the point, that perhaps his attorney told him to make this statement. If so, I'm confused. One minute he's trying to explain his behavior, the next he says, I'm not asking for forgiveness. What are we supposed to make of that?
Yeah, clearly. He actually literally looked over at his lawyer and said, am I doing this properly? Like, that didn't say it, but, that was his look. I mean, the bottom line is this is definitely a defense counsel move. Was
that, or was it was right before he said, I will not blame you if you kill me? Why was that sentence so important?
Because, like we talked about earlier, to underscore, I really don't think that he cares at this point about his fate. I don't think he's fighting for his life. I don't think he's looking for leniency or some forgiveness. I don't think he's looking for a way out of this. He has relegated and accepted his fate, relegated himself to his fate, and I really believe that he wants out. To be very blunt with you, I think that his lawyer, in a Hail Mary situation, said, please, appeal yourself, throw yourself into the mercy of the court, kind of thing. At the Queen, and I don't think the defendant's heart is in it. To be very blunt with you, I mean, just reading it, it's also going back and forth. It's very incongruous.
Okay.
Because on one hand, he's admitting to it, he's saying I'm sorry, but then spare my life, don't spare my life. Which is it? I think this is really where the defense counsel is showing that. The threads and the holes in their sort of defense at this point.
And we're really going to have to see what the defense ultimately does in the prosecution, because this week was a battle of whether or not this man suffers from a mental disease or defect, and whether or not the jury will take hold of that and say, perhaps this man should not be sentenced to death. We'll have to see. Now, again, I have to thank my special guest for this afternoon, Rahul Manchanda. Thank you so much for coming on. It was a pleasure having you.
Thank you very much.
Have a great weekend. Ladies and gentlemen, I want you to have a great weekend. From all of us here at Law and Crime, thank you for joining us. Have a great weekend. We'll be back on Monday, 9 a.m. We're going to show the conclusion live of the Anthony Kirkland case. Take care.